The sun was setting over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the quiet countryside. The hum of crickets filled the air as a black SUV pulled into a small gas station off the highway. Inside the vehicle were 4 soldiers, their uniforms still carrying the faint scent of dust from distant lands where they had served tirelessly for months. They were finally on leave, heading home to reunite with their families after a long and grueling deployment overseas. Sergeant Marcus Hayes sat in the driver's seat, his strong hands gripping the steering wheel. He glanced at his comrades through the rearview mirror. Corporal Elijah Johnson was scrolling through his phone, probably looking at pictures of his 2 young daughters. Private First Class Jamal Carter leaned back in the passenger seat, his head tilted toward the window as he watched the fields roll by. Specialist Darnell Williams sat quietly in the back, munching on a bag of chips he bought earlier during a quick stop. "Man, I can't wait to get home," Jamal said, breaking the silence. "I'm gonna eat my mom's fried chicken until I pass out." Elijah chuckled. "You better save some for the rest of us. I haven't had good food in forever." Marcus smiled slightly but kept his focus on the road. "We're almost there," he said. "Just need to fill up here and grab some snacks before we hit the last leg of the trip." As they parked near the gas pumps, the soldiers stepped out, stretching their legs after hours of driving. The gas station was simple, a small convenience store with faded paint and a flickering neon sign that read "Opium." It seemed peaceful enough, the kind of place you'd expect to find only locals stopping by for coffee or roadside supplies. But then, the rumble of engines shattered the calm. A group of bikers roared into the parking lot, their motorcycles kicking up clouds of dust as they skidded to a stop. There were about 10 of them, clad in leather jackets adorned with patches and insignias that hinted at their rough-and-tumble lifestyle. Their leader, a burly man with a scruffy beard and sunglasses perched atop his head, dismounted and strode toward the entrance of the store. His name was Razor, and he carried himself with an air of arrogance that immediately set the soldiers on edge. The bikers didn't pay much attention to the soldiers at first, too busy laughing loudly and showing off their bikes. But it didn't take long for things to shift. One of the bikers glanced over at the soldiers, his eyes narrowing as he took in their uniforms. He nudged another biker, whispering something that made both men smirk. Jamal noticed the exchange and frowned. "What's their deal?" he muttered under his breath. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry about it," he said calmly. "Let's just finish up and get out of here." Despite Marcus's words, the tension in the air was palpable. The soldiers tried to go about their business, pumping gas and browsing the snack aisle inside the store, but the bikers' presence loomed large, their loud voices echoing across the parking lot. Something about the way they looked at the soldiers felt off. It was as if they were sizing them up, testing boundaries even though no words had been exchanged yet. Little did anyone know, this seemingly ordinary pit stop was about to become anything but routine. As the soldiers continued their routine at the gas station, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Inside the convenience store, Jamal stood in front of a rack of snacks, trying to decide between chips and candy. Elijah leaned casually against the counter, scrolling through his phone while waiting to pay for his energy drink. Outside, Marcus and Darnell were finishing up with the gas pump, chatting quietly about plans for their upcoming leave. The bikers, however, seemed determined to make their presence known. Their laughter was louder now, almost taunting, as they gathered near the entrance of the store. One of them, a wiry man with tattoos snaking up his arms, walked past Jamal and deliberately bumped into him, causing the bag of chips in Jamal's hand to fall to the floor. "Watch where you're going," the biker muttered under his breath, his tone laced with hostility. Though he didn't say anything outright offensive yet, the implication behind his words hung heavy in the air. Jamal froze for a moment, staring at the fallen snack. He clenched his jaw but forced himself to stay calm. Bending down, he picked up the bag and brushed it off before putting it back on the shelf. "No problem," he said evenly, turning away. But the biker wasn't done. He smirked, glancing over his shoulder at his friends who had begun to gather around. "Guess some people don't know how to hold their ground," he sneered, just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Elijah stepped forward instinctively, his protective instincts kicking in. But Marcus appeared in the doorway of the store just then, having noticed the tension from outside. With a subtle shake of his head, he signaled for his team to keep their cool. There was no need to escalate things unnecessarily. They were outnumbered, and this wasn't the time or place for a confrontation. Still, the bikers misinterpreted the soldiers' restraint as weakness. Emboldened by their lack of response, they began making comments under their breath, their voices dripping with disdain. Words like cowards and not real men floated through the air, clearly meant to provoke a reaction. Razor, the leader of the group, finally joined the fray. Walking up to the soldiers with an arrogant swagger, he crossed his arms and looked them up and down. "You boys sure dress fancy for a bunch of nobodies," he said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. His lips curled into a sneer as he added, "Must be nice pretending to be heroes." Marcus squared his shoulders, his expression unreadable. "We're not looking for trouble," he replied calmly, though there was a firmness in his tone that commanded respect. "Just here to refuel and get back on the road." "Oh, come on," Razor shot back, feigning surprise. "Aren't you supposed to be tough? All those medals and badges mean nothing if you can't even stand your ground." The comment drew a few chuckles from the other bikers, but the soldiers remained silent. They exchanged quick glances, silently reinforcing their unspoken agreement. Asterisk don't engage. Asterisk yet. The bikers weren't satisfied. If anything, the soldiers' composure only fueled their aggression further. One of the bikers, emboldened by Razor's lead, stepped closer to Elijah, who was still standing near the counter. "What's wrong, soldier boy?" he jeered. Too scared to fight back. Elijah's hands tightened into fists at his sides, but he took a deep breath and forced himself to relax. "Not worth it," he murmured softly, more to himself than anyone else. Still, the insult stung, and the bikers could see it. The situation was spiraling out of control, and the bikers seemed intent on pushing the soldiers to their breaking point. What started as harmless banter had quickly turned into something far more sinister. The soldiers tried to ignore the taunts, focusing instead on wrapping up their stop so they could leave. But the bikers weren't about to let them go without a fight, or so they thought. Unbeknownst to the gang, they had underestimated the men standing before them. These weren't ordinary travelers. These were highly trained soldiers who had faced far worse than a group of rowdy bikers. And soon, the bikers would learn exactly what happens when you mess with the wrong people. The tension in the gas station parking lot was thick enough to cut with a knife. The bikers, emboldened by their growing numbers, and the soldiers' continued restraint, pressed closer, circling around them like predators testing their prey. Razor stood at the center of it all, his arms crossed, smirking as if he'd already won. His confidence radiated off him, but there was an underlying arrogance that hinted at his overconfidence. "You boys really think you're tough, huh?" Razor taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. "All dressed up in those fancy uniforms, acting like you own the place. But I don't see much fight in you." Marcus stood tall, his posture unwavering despite the aggression surrounding him. He locked eyes with Razor, his expression calm but resolute. "We're not here for trouble," Marcus repeated firmly, his voice steady and commanding. "Just let us go about our business, and we'll be out of your way." Razor laughed, throwing his head back as though Marcus had just told the funniest joke. "Oh, come on, Sergeant," he sneered, glancing pointedly at the insignia on Marcus's uniform. "You're supposed to protect people, right? So why aren't you standing up to us now?" Elijah shifted uncomfortably beside Marcus, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Jamal and Darnell exchanged wary glances, their bodies tense, ready to react if things escalated further. They knew they couldn't afford to lose control. Not here, not now. But the bikers' relentless provocation was wearing thin on their patience. When Elijah tried to step away from the group to create some distance, one of the bikers, a wiry man with greasy hair, reached out and grabbed him roughly by the shoulder. "Where do you think you're going, soldier boy?" the biker growled, yanking Elijah back toward the group. "You don't get to walk away from this." That was the final straw. Something inside the soldiers snapped, not into anger, but into focus. Their training kicked in instantly, years of discipline overriding emotion. Marcus raised a hand slightly, signaling for his team to hold their ground. This wasn't just a random scuffle anymore. It was a calculated situation, and they were more than prepared to handle it. Specialist Darnell Williams broke the silence, his voice calm but laced with steel. "You really don't know who you're messing with," he said, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. His tone was measured, almost casual, but there was an unmistakable warning beneath it. The bikers hesitated for half a second, caught off guard by the sudden shift in energy. For the first time since the confrontation began, doubt flickered across their faces. But Razor quickly masked his uncertainty with bravado, stepping forward until he was inches away from Marcus. "What did you say?" Razor spat, jabbing a finger into Marcus's chest. "You think you scare me. You ain't nothing but a bunch of cowards hiding behind badges." Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his voice low but carrying enough authority to silence the entire group. "Last chance," he said evenly. "Back off, or you'll regret it." For a moment, no one moved. The air was electric, charged with anticipation. The bikers glanced at each other, unsure whether to take the threat seriously. After all, how dangerous could 4 soldiers really be against 10 burly bikers? But then, without warning, the standoff erupted. One of the bikers lunged toward Jamal, swinging wildly. In an instant, the soldiers sprang into action, moving with precision and purpose. Years of combat training took over as they executed every movement with flawless efficiency. Sergeant Marcus Hayes stepped forward, intercepting Razor before he could make another move. With a swift motion, Marcus grabbed Razor's arm, twisting it behind his back in a maneuver so smooth it looked effortless. Razor let out a startled grunt, dropping to one knee as Marcus applied just enough pressure to immobilize him without causing serious harm. At the same time, Corporal Elijah Johnson spun around, using his body weight to deflect the biker who had grabbed him earlier. A quick strike to the man's solar plexus sent him stumbling backward, gasping for breath. Elijah followed up with a controlled takedown, pinning the biker to the ground with minimal effort. Private First Class Jamal Carter and Specialist Darnell Williams worked together seamlessly, their teamwork honed through countless drills and missions. When 2 bikers rushed toward them, Darnell sidestepped one attacker while Jamal used leverage to send the other sprawling onto the asphalt. Within seconds, both men were incapacitated, groaning in pain as they struggled to regain their footing. The bikers, caught completely off guard by the soldiers' speed and skill, scrambled to regroup. But it was too late. The tide had turned, and the soldiers weren't holding back anymore. Every move was calculated, every action deliberate. It wasn't about revenge. The parking lot was eerily quiet now, save for the groans of the bikers sprawled across the asphalt. The soldiers stood tall and composed, their breathing steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. They had moved with such precision and efficiency that it seemed almost surreal, even to them. It wasn't brute force or anger that won the fight. It was discipline, teamwork, and years of training that turned what could have been chaos into a controlled display of skill. Sergeant Marcus Hayes tightened his grip on Razor's arm, keeping him pinned in place. Razor's face was pressed against the ground, his sunglasses long gone, and his earlier arrogance replaced by panic. "Let me go," he growled, though there was no real threat left in his voice, only desperation. Marcus leaned down slightly, his tone calm but firm. "You wanted a fight," he said, his voice low enough that only Razor could hear. "Now you know what happens when you pick one with the wrong people." He gave Razor's arm a slight twist, not enough to cause injury, but just enough to remind him who was in control. Razor winced and stopped struggling, finally realizing resistance was futile. Nearby, Corporal Elijah Johnson stood over the biker who had grabbed him earlier. The man was sitting awkwardly on the ground, clutching his side where Elijah had landed a perfectly aimed strike. Elijah crossed his arms, looking down at him with an expression that was neither triumphant nor angry, just resolute. "Next time," Elijah said evenly, "think twice before putting your hands on someone who doesn't want trouble." Private First Class Jamal Carter and Specialist Darnell Williams were already helping each other brush off the dust from their uniforms as they surveyed the scene. Two bikers lay near them, groaning softly as they tried, and failed, to get back on their feet. Darnell crouched beside one of them briefly, checking to ensure none of the injuries were serious. "We didn't come here looking for this," he said matter-of-factly, meeting the biker's gaze. "But we're trained to handle it. Remember that." Onlookers who had been watching the confrontation unfold from a safe distance couldn't help but stare in awe. Some whispered among themselves, while others pulled out their phones to record the aftermath. A middle-aged woman standing near her car clapped her hands once, unable to contain her admiration. "Good job, boys," she called out, her voice breaking the silence. "Thank you for serving, and for showing these bullies what respect looks like." The comment drew nods of agreement from other bystanders, many of whom had witnessed the bikers' aggressive behavior leading up to the altercation. For some, it was satisfying to see justice served so swiftly and decisively. Others simply marveled at how quickly the soldiers had neutralized the situation without resorting to unnecessary violence. As the reality of their defeat sank in, the bikers exchanged humiliated glances. Gone were their smirks and taunts. Instead, they looked defeated and embarrassed. One of them muttered under his breath, "These guys are monsters." Another shook his head, muttering something about never messing with soldiers again. Razor, still kneeling with Marcus's hand firmly on his shoulder, managed to twist his neck just enough to glare at the sergeant. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice tinged with both fear and disbelief. Marcus released him slowly, stepping back but remaining alert. He straightened his uniform and looked directly into Razor's eyes. "We're soldiers," he replied simply, his tone carrying the weight of authority. "We protect this country, even when people like you don't seem to appreciate it. You wanted a fight. Well, now you've seen what we're capable of." The words hit Razor hard, and for a moment, he looked genuinely ashamed. But shame quickly morphed into resentment as he struggled to his feet, brushing dirt off his leather jacket. His gang followed suit, hobbling to their motorcycles with wounded pride. None of them dared to retaliate further. They knew better now. As the bikers regrouped, their leader shot one last glare at the soldiers before mounting his bike. "This isn't over," Razor muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Without waiting for a response, he revved his engine and sped off, his gang trailing behind him in disarray. The soldiers watched them go, their expressions unreadable. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, only relief that the situation hadn't escalated further. Marcus exhaled deeply, running a hand over his shaved head. "All right, team," he said quietly. "Let's clean up and get out of here." They returned to their SUV, ignoring the murmurs of approval from the crowd. As they climbed inside, Elijah broke the silence with a wry smile. "Well, that was interesting." Jamal chuckled weakly. "Yeah, nothing like a quick lesson in humility to spice up a road trip." Despite the levity in their words, the hum of the motorcycles faded into the distance as the bikers sped away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a lingering sense of unease. The parking lot, once charged with tension, now felt eerily calm. The soldiers stood by their SUV, taking a moment to collect themselves before addressing the aftermath of what had just unfolded. Their uniforms were slightly disheveled, but their composure remained unshaken. A few bystanders approached cautiously, their faces a mix of admiration and concern. One man, wearing a baseball cap and holding a cup of coffee, extended his hand toward Sergeant Marcus Hayes. "Thank you," he said earnestly. "I've seen those guys around here before. They're troublemakers. You handled them perfectly." Marcus shook the man's hand with a polite nod, but offered no further comment. He appreciated the sentiment, but he knew this wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about doing what needed to be done, protecting themselves, and sending a clear message that disrespect wouldn't go unanswered. As more onlookers gathered, some began recounting details of the confrontation to others who hadn't witnessed it firsthand. A young woman holding her phone filmed the scene discreetly, capturing the scattered helmets and gloves the bikers had left behind in their hasty retreat. Her voice trembled with excitement as she narrated. "These soldiers just took down an entire biker gang without breaking a sweat. You can tell they're pros." The attention made the team uncomfortable. They weren't looking for fame or validation. They simply wanted to move on. Corporal Elijah Johnson leaned against the hood of the SUV, arms crossed, scanning the crowd with quiet vigilance. Private First Class Jamal Carter busied himself checking the vehicle one last time, ensuring everything was secure for the road ahead. Specialist Darnell Williams stood beside Marcus, his expression thoughtful as he observed the murmurs spreading among the witnesses. It wasn't long before flashing lights appeared at the edge of the parking lot. 2 police cars pulled in, their sirens silent but their presence commanding. Officers stepped out, their eyes immediately drawn to the soldiers standing near the center of the commotion. One officer, a tall man with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached Marcus first. "What happened here?" the officer asked, his tone firm but not accusatory. Marcus stepped forward, speaking clearly and calmly. "We stopped here to refuel and grab supplies," he explained. "A group of bikers confronted us, became aggressive, and escalated the situation. We acted in self-defense to neutralize the threat." The officer nodded, jotting notes onto his pad. He glanced around at the scattered debris and turned back to the growing group of onlookers. Several people eagerly volunteered their accounts, corroborating the soldiers' version of events. They were provoked, the woman with the phone insisted. The bikers started it, and these guys handled it professionally. Another witness chimed in, pointing toward the empty beer bottles near the gas pumps. Those bikers reeked of alcohol. They were asking for trouble from the start. Satisfied with the initial reports, the officers split up to gather more information. One stayed to speak with the soldiers while the other interviewed the bystanders. Razor and his gang might have fled, but their reckless behavior had left plenty of evidence behind, from discarded gear to the unmistakable tire marks scorching the pavement. As the investigation continued, the sergeant ensured his team stuck to the facts. There was no embellishment, no attempt to paint themselves as heroes. They described the encounter plainly, emphasizing restraint despite provocation. When asked why they hadn't pursued the bikers after subduing them, Marcus replied simply, "Our goal was to de-escalate, not escalate. Once the threat was neutralized, there was no reason to continue." The officers exchanged glances, clearly impressed by the level-headedness displayed by the soldiers. "You men are a credit to your uniform," one of them remarked sincerely. Not everyone would have shown that kind of discipline. The comment brought a rare smile to Elijah's face. "It's what we're trained to do," he said humbly. "Stay calm under pressure." By the time the authorities finished their preliminary assessment, word of the incident had spread even further. More people arrived, curious to see the soldiers who had stood up to the notorious biker gang. Some clapped softly as the team prepared to leave, while others offered heartfelt thanks. Despite their discomfort with the attention, the soldiers acknowledged the gestures graciously, knowing it came from a place of genuine respect. Before climbing back into the SUV, Marcus paused to address his team. "We did our job today," he said quietly, his gaze steady. "But let's remember why we wear these uniforms, to serve and protect. Not for glory, but because it's..." The hum of the motorcycles faded into the distance as the bikers sped away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a lingering sense of unease. The parking lot, once charged with tension, now felt eerily calm. The soldiers stood by their SUV, taking a moment to collect themselves before addressing the aftermath of what had just unfolded. Their uniforms were slightly disheveled, but their composure remained unshaken. A few bystanders approached cautiously, their faces a mix of admiration and concern. One man, wearing a baseball cap and holding a cup of coffee, extended his hand toward Sergeant Marcus Hayes. "Thank you," he said earnestly. "I've seen those guys around here before. They're troublemakers. You handled them perfectly." Marcus shook the man's hand with a polite nod, but offered no further comment. He appreciated the sentiment, but he knew this wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about doing what needed to be done, protecting themselves, and sending a clear message that disrespect wouldn't go unanswered. As more onlookers gathered, some began recounting details of the confrontation to others who hadn't witnessed it firsthand. A young woman holding her phone filmed the scene discreetly, capturing the scattered helmets and gloves the bikers had left behind in their hasty retreat. Her voice trembled with excitement as she narrated. "These soldiers just took down an entire biker gang without breaking a sweat. You can tell they're pros." The attention made the team uncomfortable. They weren't looking for fame or validation. They simply wanted to move on. Corporal Elijah Johnson leaned against the hood of the SUV, arms crossed, scanning the crowd with quiet vigilance. Private First Class Jamal Carter busied himself checking the vehicle one last time, ensuring everything was secure for the road ahead. Specialist Darnell Williams stood beside Marcus, his expression thoughtful as he observed the murmurs spreading among the witnesses. It wasn't long before flashing lights appeared at the edge of the parking lot. 2 police cars pulled in, their sirens silent but their presence commanding. Officers stepped out, their eyes immediately drawn to the soldiers standing near the center of the commotion. One officer, a tall man with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached Marcus first. "What happened here?" the officer asked, his tone firm but not accusatory. Marcus stepped forward, speaking clearly and calmly. "We stopped here to refuel and grab supplies," he explained. "A group of bikers confronted us, became aggressive, and escalated the situation. We acted in self-defense to neutralize the threat." The officer nodded, jotting notes onto his pad. He glanced around at the scattered debris and turned back to the growing group of onlookers. Several people eagerly volunteered their accounts, corroborating the soldiers' version of events. They were provoked, the woman with the phone insisted. The bikers started it, and these guys handled it professionally. Another witness chimed in, pointing toward the empty beer bottles near the gas pumps. Those bikers reeked of alcohol. They were asking for trouble from the start. Satisfied with the initial reports, the officers split up to gather more information. One stayed to speak with the soldiers while the other interviewed the bystanders. Razor and his gang might have fled, but their reckless behavior had left plenty of evidence behind, from discarded gear to the unmistakable tire marks scorching the pavement. As the investigation continued, the sergeant ensured his team stuck to the facts. There was no embellishment, no attempt to paint themselves as heroes. They described the encounter plainly, emphasizing restraint despite provocation. When asked why they hadn't pursued the bikers after subduing them, Marcus replied simply, "Our goal was to de-escalate, not escalate. Once the threat was neutralized, there was no reason to continue." The officers exchanged glances, clearly impressed by the level-headedness displayed by the soldiers. "You men are a credit to your uniform," one of them remarked sincerely. Not everyone would have shown that kind of discipline. The comment brought a rare smile to Elijah's face. "It's what we're trained to do," he said humbly. "Stay calm under pressure." By the time the authorities finished their preliminary assessment, word of the incident had spread even further. More people arrived, curious to see the soldiers who had stood up to the notorious biker gang. Some clapped softly as the team prepared to leave, while others offered heartfelt thanks. Despite their discomfort with the attention, the soldiers acknowledged the gestures graciously, knowing it came from a place of genuine respect. Before climbing back into the SUV, Marcus paused to address his team. "We did our job today," he said quietly, his gaze steady. But let's remember why we wear these uniforms. To serve and protect. Not for glory, but because it's. The days that followed the gas station incident passed quickly, but the memory of it lingered like a shadow. The soldiers went about their routines, morning drills, weapon maintenance, and strategy sessions, but there was a quiet undercurrent among them. They had faced something raw and uncomfortable, a reminder that even in their own country, wearing the uniform didn't shield them from prejudice or hostility. Sergeant Marcus Hayes sat alone on a bench near the base's running track one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking sight that usually brought him peace. But tonight, his thoughts were heavy. He replayed the confrontation at the gas station over and over in his mind, not because he doubted their actions, but because it forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth. No matter how much progress society claimed to make, some battles never truly ended. Corporal Elijah Johnson joined him after a while, carrying 2 bottles of water. He handed one to Marcus without saying a word, sitting down beside him. For a few minutes, neither spoke. They simply watched the world grow dimmer as night crept in. Finally, Elijah broke the silence. "You think we'll ever stop having days like that?" he asked softly. Marcus took a sip of water before responding. "Probably not," he admitted. "But maybe it's not about stopping those days. It's about how we handle them when they come." Elijah nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the distant tree line. "I keep thinking about what those bikers said, about how they acted like our uniforms meant nothing, like all the sacrifices we've made don't matter to people like them. It hurts," Marcus said plainly, "because deep down, you want to believe everyone respects what we do. But respect isn't automatic. It's earned, and sometimes it has to be demanded. What matters is that we know why we serve, not for recognition, but because it's the right thing to do." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics as other soldiers began trickling onto the track for evening runs. Private First Cell Jamal Carter jogged past, waving cheerfully despite the sweat dripping down his face. Specialist Darnell Williams followed close behind, teasing Jamal about his pace. Seeing their camaraderie brought a small smile to both men's faces. Later that week, news of the incident spread beyond the confines of the base. Someone had uploaded footage of the altercation online, capturing the bikers' aggression and the soldiers' calm, calculated response. Within hours, the video went viral, sparking heated debates across social media platforms. Some praised the soldiers for their professionalism and restraint, while others criticized the bikers' behavior, calling for accountability. Comments flooded in from veterans, active duty service members, and civilians alike, many sharing stories of similar experiences. One comment stood out to Marcus when he finally decided to check the video himself. It read, "These soldiers remind us what true strength looks like, not brute force, but discipline, courage, and standing up for what's right even when it's hard." Though the attention made the team uneasy, they couldn't deny the impact it had. Invitations poured in from local community groups asking the soldiers to speak at events. Schools requested interviews so students could hear firsthand about leadership, teamwork, and resilience. Even news outlets reached out, eager to cover their story. Colonel Reynolds called the team into his office one morning, holding up a printout of an article featuring their names. "Looks like you're celebrities now," he said with a wry grin. "How are you handling all this?" Marcus spoke for the group, his tone measured. "Local. We didn't ask for any of this, sir," he said. "We were just doing our job. If people see something positive in it, that's great, but we didn't do it for recognition." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Well said. Still, your actions have inspired a lot of folks. Sometimes, being a role model means more than leading troops. It means showing the world what integrity looks like." The soldiers accepted the invitations cautiously, agreeing to share their story only if it helped promote unity and understanding. At a town hall meeting a few weeks later, they stood before a packed auditorium, their presence commanding respect without effort. Marcus stepped up to the microphone first, his voice steady and clear. "We didn't fight those bikers because we wanted revenge or glory," he began. "We fought back because we refused to let hate win. Our training taught us how to defend ourselves, but it also taught us when to walk away. That balance is what keeps us grounded." As each soldier took turns speaking, the audience listened intently, moved by their humility and wisdom. By the end of the event, the room erupted in applause, but the soldiers remained humble. They knew their story wasn't about heroics. It was about perseverance, dignity, and the power of standing together. Back at the base that night, the four men gathered in the rec room, flipping through channels on the TV. A news segment about their speech aired briefly, showing clips of the crowd cheering. Jamal muted the volume and leaned back with a sigh. "Feels weird, doesn't it? All this attention." Darnell smirked. "Yeah, but if it makes someone think twice before acting like those bikers, then maybe it's worth it." They laughed quietly, finding comfort in the simplicity of each other's company. Though the scars of the past wouldn't disappear overnight, they found strength in knowing they had turned adversity into inspiration, for themselves and for others. Weeks turned into months, and life at the base settled back into its usual rhythm. The soldiers returned to their duties with renewed focus, channeling the lessons they had learned from the gas station incident into everything they did. They trained harder, worked closer as a team, and leaned on each other during moments of doubt or frustration. Though the confrontation was just one moment in time, it left an indelible mark, a reminder that strength wasn't just about physical prowess, it was about character, resilience, and standing firm in the face of adversity. The public attention eventually waned, but the impact of their story continued to ripple outward. Schools invited them to speak to students about leadership and perseverance. Community centers held events celebrating veterans, using the soldiers' experience as an example of courage and discipline. Even strangers approached them occasionally, whether at grocery stores or gas stations, to thank them for their service and share how their story had inspired hope. One day, while attending a local Veterans Day parade, Marcus noticed a young boy tugging at his mother's sleeve as the soldiers marched by. The child couldn't have been older than 10, clutching a small American flag in one hand and pointing excitedly with the other. "Mom, are those the soldiers from the video?" he asked, his eyes wide with admiration. The mother smiled warmly and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. Those are the men who stood up for what's right." Marcus caught the exchange from the corner of his eye and felt a pang of humility. He glanced at his teammates, who were walking proudly beside him, their boots striking the pavement in perfect unison. None of them sought fame or accolades, yet here they were, symbols of resilience to a world that often struggled to find light in darkness. After the parade, the team gathered under a tent set up for veterans, sharing laughs over hot dogs and soda. A group of elderly vets sat nearby, swapping war stories and reminiscing about days gone by. One of them, a grizzled man with a cane, shuffled over to the soldiers and extended his hand. "You boys remind me of us back in the day," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "Standing tall when the odds are against you. That's what being a soldier is all about." The words resonated deeply with the team. It wasn't about the fight at the gas station anymore. It was about something bigger. Their actions had become a testament to the values they swore to uphold: honor, respect, and unwavering determination. As the months passed, the soldiers found themselves reflecting less on the bikers and more on the legacy they wanted to leave behind. They began mentoring younger recruits, teaching them not only combat skills, but also the importance of staying grounded and treating others with dignity. Elijah took particular interest in this role, often pulling aside nervous newcomers to offer advice. "It's not just about surviving out there," he'd say. "It's about knowing who you are and why you're fighting." Jamal and Darnell started volunteering at a local youth center, leading workshops on teamwork and conflict resolution. They used simple exercises to teach kids how to work together and solve problems without resorting to anger or violence. The children loved them, drawn to their humor and easygoing nature. For the soldiers, it was a chance to give back, to show the next generation that real strength came from unity, not division. Even Marcus, who rarely opened up about personal struggles, found solace in writing letters to families of fallen comrades. In quiet moments alone, he penned heartfelt messages of gratitude and support, ensuring no one felt forgotten. It was his way of honoring those who couldn't stand with him anymore, and reminding himself why he chose this path in the first place. By the time another deployment loomed on the horizon, the soldiers were ready, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. They knew challenges awaited them overseas, just as they had faced challenges at home. But they also knew they weren't alone. Together, they had weathered storms and emerged stronger, bound by a bond that transcended words. On the eve of their departure, the team gathered around a campfire outside the barracks, the flames casting flickering shadows across their faces. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. The crackling fire and the weight of shared memories filled the silence. Finally, Marcus stood, raising his cup in a silent toast. His teammates followed suit, their eyes meeting briefly before returning to the fire.